So Fairy Gone has concluded after yesterday's episode, episode 24, and I reviewed the first 12 episodes week by week, and then Fairy Gone took a season break to lead up into the fall season, and I was pretty sure that I wasn't going to come back to Fairy Gone. I would have probably continued to review it had it been a consecutive season. I was really happy to have waited and be able to binge this. I did it over a couple of days, and then I caught up and then waited for the last episode. Fairy Gone, in a lot of ways, if people were to ask me how they would watch this, because some anime are better off a week by week or every couple of episodes, I can think of an anime like Hsieh. I would never want to binge that, but I'd want to savor a couple of episodes, take a break, come back the next day. But a series like Fairy Gone is so much better in a binge, and I loved the first season, or I guess the first half of the season, I guess, however you want to call it. I kind of consider this to be one season of anime in a lot of ways. It's so interesting to see how much it kind of flourished for me, even better, because there was so much, criticism and just really not a lot of deserving hate that was thrown this anime's way. Like, I don't think this is going to be in the top 30 anime of the year, but it was a good anime overall with a lot of interesting ideas and themes, and based on where they took the characters and the story in the second half here, I really enjoyed my time, and they surprisingly delivered an emotional punch to kind of tie everything together in a really interesting way. Something that I think the anime did very well is the idea of, if you compare the first half of the anime to the second half, you're gonna find that the second half is a lot more personal, but that's not to say I thought the first half did things incorrectly. There definitely was some missteps here and there, but in terms of how they delivered their characters, their introductions, the action set pieces and things like that, I don't think they messed it up. But like with any story, the longer you watch, the more connected you're going to be to a character like Wolfram, the character like Veronica. So this half of the season, every time they reintroduced a character, it didn't feel like we were seeing a new face, but rather, similar to these characters, we understood their past, we understood why they were disappointed that they had to fight them, and we understood the actual conflict, where if you look from episodes 1 through 12, a lot of these characters we get introduced, you could tell there was some sort of history, but we didn't know that history because we just started the anime. It's a pretty standard narrative technique, but I really did like how it played out, and then leading in through 13 through 24, every time a character was on screen, I knew them in some degree. So every set piece, whether it be action or dialogue, it actually felt pretty impactful, and I thought they had a really interesting flow all the way from episode 1 throughout 24. And if I was to pick my favorite section of the Fairy Gone anime, it's definitely the final 6 episodes, give or take. Even though there was definitely a lot of action, I felt like the reason the action felt so important was not only did you have this original fairy, the divine beast, pretty much going to cleanse the world to start anew, you also had just so much on the line, where you look at characters like Radon, Veronica, and Wolfram, just to see how either they were switching sides or just trying to atone for their sins, it felt rewarding and justifiable. And if you watched any of my Fairy Gone reviews from episodes 1 through 12, I was a big fan of Radon. A lot of people shit on him, and it wasn't like he was without his sins, but I felt like Radon was a character who really represented that kind of conflicting feeling of war, where people are going to do some pretty nasty things, and when you come home, sometimes you have to answer for those sins, either to yourself or the people that you wronged. And the idea that this character never really tried to say what he did was wrong, but rather he did feel bad for who he did hurt, because it's so interesting when you think about fairies in the world of Fairy Gone, because you have this mythical beast that pretty much becomes some people's religion, as seen by the cult kind of raising the divine beast up from the grave. It's interesting how in the middle of that war, he burned down that village, he burned down the forest, because he truly believed that humans shouldn't rely on this mythical power while also being intoxicated by the power that he has, not wanting other people to have it. It was scummy, and he knows it's scummy. And to see just the idea of Veronica and Marley and how that kind of triangle worked out in this season, I felt like they never tried to justify what he did, but rather explain his mindset and how he led himself down that path. And the fact that in his final moments, he never wanted their forgiveness. He just wanted to give that actual heart-to-heart apology. You can accept it, you can completely throw it out the window. All I need to know is that you understand this is how I feel. Rather than saying he regrets what he did, he just apologizes for what's happened. And I felt like just moments like that, and really seeing Radon, he becomes acting prime minister for a very brief while before he gets killed. Prime ministers in this anime, they just do not last long, I have to say. I felt like Radon, without a doubt, was my favorite part of the Fairy Gone anime. The whole idea that you pretty much start off the anime knowing that this atrocity happens, some madman who's pretty much burning down villages, and then by the end of his life, you kind of understand that most people probably put in his situation may have done the same thing in the middle of conflict, especially during the Unification War. Like, I love how this anime didn't rely on trying to justify or redeem a character, but rather explain his mindset, explain why he was like that, while also just saying, I accept your apology, but of course what you did can never be reversed, and he understands that. And then you have characters like Wolfred, who, the second best part of this anime without a doubt. The idea that you lost your family and you're so broken, and then basically this cult comes in and convinces you to go with them, like, the idea of how they pretty much use religion in this anime was really interesting, as pretty much in this world, they kind of do have a god that they can see face to face. It's these fairies. It's these mythical floating spirits that can do crazy things, where with our world, you know, people just want to hope and believe there's something more powerful out there. But in the world of Fairygon, they can literally see that, and how he pretty much got indoctrinated into a cult, and how by the end of the anime he kind of did switch, and it was every time a character kind of either switched or kind of were trying to just apologize for what they've done, it didn't feel like it came out of left field. It almost felt like the reason characters were fighting on one side was because they were just wronged in the past, and just the wrong people came around at the wrong time, and that's why they led down that path. And characters like Free had the ability to kind of help people the same way Marlia did for someone like Veronica. And Veronica, like, I can definitely say I was not expecting her to die, but the idea of a good death towards an end of an anime, especially if you're gonna say, like, we got this divine beast just erasing the town, we can't just leave it as just mindless villagers were getting killed. You gotta say, like, someone important has to die to make it feel like there was actually a threat all along. And Veronica made the most sense, because she was someone who, what I love about that entire sequence was how, like, they did power up Marlia, but everything actually kind of made sense here. Because Veronica was someone who was kind of built on blind rage. So her natural progression to reunite with Marlia, it felt like a really slow burn, but by the time she did realize, and especially when she actually talked face to face with Radon with Marlia there, her rage could disappear somewhat. And the idea of, like, this power-up, where the whole idea of fairy possession, or just, like, what was that? Like, what was the point? And then you learn that it was all connected to that forest. You say, okay, there's actually a justifiable reason. The laws of the Fairygon universe make sense here. And to have an ability like hers, who can basically go inside the blood, and then you have a character like Marlia, who throughout the season was pretty much like healing fairies or releasing them because she could hear them in some way. So the idea that a fairy possession could work and kind of merge into one once she's dead, it actually makes logical sense, while not really giving a new power, but just combining two existing ones while using mechanics that were always there. So this anime not only avoided escalation, but also it gave an emotional impact, and didn't reverse it, didn't introduce some time-altering mechanics so the forest could be saved and she would never have to deal with this, but they let it feel like an emotional punch while not doing something crazy like giving her an explosive ball of flame that could destroy it, but no, just releasing the soul, which was pretty much all Marlia was this entire run. She never was like a fighter like Veronica. She was someone who just wanted to give a helping hand, which totally makes sense. And it never really felt cliche, because she was a character who always could understand the fear and the doubts of these fairies, because these fairies are basically just being manipulated by the will of man. And so of course it makes sense that someone salvaging their heart would be able to be free and things like that. So just like the dynamic between like those characters relating to our main cast, it just felt like every time they were on screen, it felt as if there was emotional punches. It felt disappointing, it felt heartbreaking, and every time a character died, like BV or any of them, it did leave an impact on me, I have to say. And I think as much as I love Veronica, I think her going out in this season was probably the most optimal way to end this season and make it feel like it was a satisfying adventure that had stakes and risks, and that Marlia has to kind of move forward by herself. You always had like that romance underplot where you had like characters like Free and Marlia. You can probably tell down the road they'll probably get together the same way someone like, I don't know, Surge and we have Clara, they're probably going to get together at some point. They never made that the focus, but rather say, like, these are people. They're going to make their decisions. We're not going to see every moment of their life. But I did like the chemistry between the characters, and seeing, you know, you got even more backstory with Marlia when everything was happening and how she was this cursed child, and just to see like why she was always so hesitant to kind of accept help from people, because literally every single time someone came into her life, something horrible happened, and to see how bad the village was to her, like, it just felt so rewarding is how I'd put it. It's why it's just really disappointing to me that not more people kept up with it, and I'm still not really sure why people found it boring, as every time I saw reasons, it just didn't make sense to me. And I'm going to go out on a limb saying it was probably the more political matters, maybe that just wasn't people's cups of tea, because like, there was actually a lot of good action in this anime, I have to say, especially in the back half, because they definitely polished up a lot of the character models for the fairies, because most of these fairies we've already seen before. There's only a couple of new ones. So I imagine with the little bit of break they did have, they could maybe touch upon the character models a bit more, because every time they were on screen, past a couple of select instances, I actually thought the fairies looked rather good. And every time they were fighting, I actually thought they went above and beyond what they did with the first half of the anime, where, like, obviously some of the characters are going to be more experienced now that they've been a part of, like, Dorothy and things like that. But I felt as if just, like, with the amount of combat we did see in this anime, it kind of felt so interesting to see the combinations. Like, there's moments where characters will, like, use their fairies to grab a hold and throw them in the air, or you'll jump out of a car, do a barrel roll basically, and then shoot. Like, there's a lot of really interesting moments with the action, and I love the look of the fairies. I've always said the idea of the fairies not meshing completely well with the human character models, it makes sense. They're supposed to be this, like, mysterious, like, summoning spirit, right? But I will say there was obviously room for polish, and I think they definitely polished it up quite well, and just all the little moments building up to this, and just how it all was, like, relating to these tomes and things like that, it just felt like everything that we thought we wanted to see more of with episodes 1 through 12, we got with this anime. We got with 13 through 24. It felt like it was actually in a lot of ways more fast-paced, while also slowing it down quite a bit in the first half of the season here, because there was a lot of moments where you had characters discussing, and there was definitely a lot of dialogue, and I will admit, there was definitely moments where I found myself zoning out off and on when I was binging this. Don't think I would have had that issue had I watched it week by week, but I felt like definitely there was moments where there was a lot of dialogue, and you kind of felt like, okay, I understand what you're saying, I understand everything that's happening here, but let's go to this mission now. I will say, like, the first maybe 4 episodes of 13 through, I don't know, like 17 or so, there was definitely moments where it was more of a slow burn, and I could understand why people could zone out, but it was still interesting nonetheless. And then once we did get into that action, once we got into the more interpersonal conflicts, it really took off, and I think they definitely landed the finish line there. I thought they did an excellent job, that it just ended up being a good anime. And I feel like so many people, they come into anime and they're like, unless it's like 10 out of 10, 9 out of 10, I'm just gonna say it's shit. But it was a good anime, sure. Obviously prioritize to whatever people need to prioritize. Like, if you only have a select time to watch anime, watch the best of the year. Sure, I completely get that. But for me, if I only was to watch things that were like 10 out of 10, I'd miss out on opportunities like Fairy Gone, which was actually a surprisingly interesting idea. Post-war turned into a more underground cultist war, which is sometimes some of the craziest, because you got these religious nut jobs who are pretty much trying to destroy the world for religious salvation. And all the characters really kind of impressed me more often than not. Sure, there was some side characters maybe I would have liked to see a bit more of, but in terms of like Wolfram, Veronica, we got Radon, Marlia, Free, like, they felt like they had good moments, and the idea of a more, it kind of had an open-ended nature. They wrapped up the main conflict while saying, like, these characters, they still have more to do in their world. They're still going to be humans who are going to rely on fairies as weapons, and you know, like, we don't have to see where that goes. We can say, I understand that they're going to keep fighting until they save the world, and make it so fairies can live in peace without fearing humans kind of taking their souls away, which is like, that's so perfect. It's so great of a way to wrap it up. And I actually would say one of the more surprising elements in this season, if you watched any of my reviews for Fairy Gone before, I love the OST. It's so thrashy, it gets you hyped up in episode 24 when they're really about to destroy the kind of divine beast here. When it kicks into that more rock anthem, holy shit, is that exciting. But there was actually a surprising amount of softer music throughout this, pretty much all 12 episodes of the second half of this anime. It felt as if they really wanted to slow it down a bit more and show a different side to the soundtrack, and I thought they did a great job with it. Honestly, the only thing that kind of feels a little iffy to me is some of the dialogue. I definitely think there was maybe too much of a stretch of just characters standing still and we're cutting back and forth, and you kind of felt like they rehashed the same dialogue a little too much every so often. But besides that, like, I feel like they understood what they wanted to go for with this anime, and overall, the pacing was pretty good overall. I liked this anime a whole lot. I mean, I definitely think if I would have reviewed this weekly, I think my enjoyment would have faltered somewhat, because everything that I kind of feel with this, like, I definitely have some different ideas and opinions on what we've seen, but it's definitely a continuation of the first half, and I felt like if I would have continued to review this week by week, I think I would have burnt myself out of Fairy Gone. I think just binging it over a couple of days was the optimal way for me to experience it. And I imagine if I was to ever rewatch this in a binge, I'd probably like it even more than I already do. And you know me, I'm one of the 5 people who enjoyed Fairy Gone, and I was already saying it's a good anime, people should watch it, while everyone else was calling me an idiot because my CG, it looks so bad, when it's like, I mean, they're not human characters, they're supposed to be fairies, they're supposed to look not normal, but I digress. Overall, I had a fun time with Fairy Gone. I'm glad to have experienced it, and hopefully, a couple of people who enjoy the Fairy Gone anime will appreciate the video, because, not many people are going to give a shit about this video, but this is an anime that I think deserves to have some voices saying it's good to watch. So hopefully I help some people out there feel like, God damn it, I'm not alone. I also enjoyed Fairy Gone. But, then again, we're only like a cult of 12 people of the Fairy Gone fandom. But what did everyone think of the second half of the season, the second season, whatever you want to call the remainder of the Fairy Gone anime? Did you enjoy it? I definitely think episode 24 was like a slam dunk, probably the best episode of the Fairy Gone anime without a doubt. But whatever anyone is feeling about the anime, do let me know down in the comment section below. And if you enjoyed the video, be sure to drop a like and remember to hit that subscribe button if you happen to be new around here. So until next time, everyone, please take care and have a good one.